The restaurant was almost empty when the waitress quietly asked the question that would change two lives forever. She stood beside the table with trembling hands, trying to keep her voice steady, while across from her sat the most powerful man she had ever served. "Can I take the leftovers for my child?" she asked, looking at the half-eaten plate rather than at him. The CEO froze. Not because the request was unusual, but because something in her eyes told him she wasn't asking for food for herself. She was asking because somewhere outside that warm restaurant, a little child was waiting for a dinner that might never come. Before we begin, if you believe that kindness can give someone a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a reminder that one small act of kindness can change an entire life. The evening had begun like any other busy night at the Meridian Crown, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, reflecting across polished tables and spotless glassware. Soft piano music floated through the dining room, mixing with the quiet hum of wealthy conversations. Outside, rain covered the streets, turning the city lights into blurred reflections across the pavement. Inside, everything was warm, elegant, and carefully controlled. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked desperate. Nothing looked like the kind of place where a person would have to ask permission to take home scraps of food. Yet behind the swinging doors of the kitchen stood 32-year-old Elena, a waitress who had learned how to smile even when her heart was breaking. Elena had been working at the Meridian Crown for almost 2 years. She was known among the staff for remembering customers' preferences, calming impatient guests, and quietly helping younger employees when they made mistakes. She had a gentle face, tired brown eyes, and dark hair usually tied into a simple bun beneath the restaurant's uniform cap. Her shoes were beginning to wear thin at the soles, but she polished them every morning before leaving home because she believed that looking professional was one thing she could still control. She had a 6-year-old son named Noah, and almost everything she did was connected to him. Noah had been born with a curious mind and a laugh that could make Elena forget the worst parts of the day. He loved drawing airplanes, even though he had never been inside one. He kept a small collection of colored pencils in a cracked plastic box and believed that one day he would become an inventor. Elena never told him when the electricity bill was overdue. She never told him when she had eaten only tea and toast so he could have a proper meal. She never told him that sometimes she stood outside grocery stores counting the money in her wallet twice, hoping the numbers might somehow change. They hadn't always lived like this. Elena's husband, Daniel, had once worked in construction and had promised that they would eventually have a small house with a blue front door. But after an accident at a construction site left him unable to work, medical bills began swallowing their savings. Months later, complications took his life, leaving Elena alone with a child, a mountain of debt, and a promise she had made beside his hospital bed that she would never let Noah believe his father's death had destroyed their future. So Elena worked. She worked morning shifts when she could find them, evening shifts when the restaurant needed extra staff, and weekends whenever someone called in sick. She learned to live on little sleep. Every morning she prepared Noah's breakfast, packed his school bag, kissed his forehead, and told him that everything was going to be okay. Then she walked several blocks to the bus stop, rode across the city, and entered a world where people sometimes spent more on a bottle of wine than she had for an entire week's groceries. She didn't resent them. At least, she tried not to. She understood that people sitting behind expensive tables weren't responsible for her problems. She simply wished, sometimes, that they could see how much effort it took for someone like her to keep standing. That rainy evening, Elena's shift had been especially difficult. The restaurant was crowded earlier, and several customers had complained about slow service. One man had snapped his fingers at her as though she were invisible. Another had criticized the way she poured water. Elena apologized each time, swallowed her pride, and kept moving. At around 9:30, a manager told her that a VIP guest had arrived. His name was Adrien Cole. Almost everyone in the restaurant knew who he was. Adrien was the 38-year-old founder and CEO of Cole Dynamics, a technology company that had grown from a small startup into one of the city's most successful corporations. Newspapers often described him as brilliant, ruthless, disciplined, and impossible to impress. He had built his company after losing his father at a young age and had spent most of his adult life believing that depending on anyone was a weakness. He entered the restaurant alone. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored. His dark hair was neatly combed back, and his expression was serious enough that several employees instinctively straightened when he walked past. He carried no visible signs of exhaustion, but behind his controlled expression was a man who had forgotten what it felt like to relax. Adrien was meeting his company's board chairman that night to discuss a massive acquisition. If the deal succeeded, his company would expand internationally. If it failed, millions of dollars could disappear. He had spent the entire day surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted promises. Executives wanted approval. Lawyers wanted signatures. Employees wanted decisions. By the time he sat at his table, he was tired of hearing his own name. Elena approached with the menu. She greeted him politely, unaware that the man sitting in front of her could change the future of hundreds of employees with a single decision. Adrien barely looked up. He ordered a simple meal and asked for sparkling water. His voice was calm but distant. Elena wrote everything down and walked away. For the next hour, she served him quietly. She noticed that he barely touched his appetizer. She noticed he kept checking his phone. She noticed that whenever someone approached his table, his shoulders tightened. She also noticed something else. He looked lonely. Not alone. Lonely. There was a difference. At 11, the restaurant began closing. One by one, customers left. Chairs were turned upside down onto tables. The piano fell silent. The bright dining room slowly became a quiet room of polished surfaces and empty plates. Adrien remained seated. His business meeting had ended badly. The acquisition had been delayed after an unexpected legal issue surfaced, and his chairman had spent the last 20 minutes blaming him. Adrien stared at the untouched food on his table. He wasn't hungry anymore. Elena approached with the check. She hesitated when she saw the amount of food still sitting there. It was enough for 2 people. Maybe 3. Her mind immediately went to Noah. That morning, there had been almost nothing left in the refrigerator. She had promised him she would bring something home. She had meant to buy groceries after work. But an unexpected deduction from her paycheck had left her with barely enough money for the bus. She looked at the plate. Then at Adrien. Then back at the food. Her pride told her to walk away. Her mother's voice, from years ago, told her never to ask anyone for something they weren't offering. But Noah's face appeared in her mind. His little hands. His empty lunchbox. The way he had asked that morning whether there would be chicken for dinner. Elena took a breath. She almost turned away. Then she stopped. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. She looked at Adrien and quietly asked if he was finished with the food. He said he was. Elena swallowed. The next words were almost impossible to say. Can I take the leftovers for my child? Adrien froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The restaurant seemed completely silent. Elena immediately regretted asking. She lowered her eyes and began explaining that she understood if it wasn't allowed, that she could throw it away if necessary, that she wasn't trying to be disrespectful. But Adrien wasn't listening to the explanation. He was staring at her face. Not the uniform. Not the tray. Her face. He suddenly remembered being 7 years old. He remembered standing in a tiny apartment with his younger sister while his mother divided one meal between them. He remembered the sound of his mother's voice telling them she wasn't hungry. He remembered believing her. Years later, he had learned the truth. She had been hungry. She simply wanted her children to eat. That memory had been buried beneath years of money, success, and ambition. Until that moment, Adrien looked at the food. Then he looked at Elena. He asked how old her child was. She hesitated before answering. 6. Adrien's expression changed. He asked if the boy had eaten dinner. Elena said nothing. That silence was answer enough. Adrien pushed the plate toward her. He told her to take everything. Elena thanked him quietly. But Adrien wasn't finished. He asked whether the boy had enough food at home. Elena looked embarrassed. She said they would manage. Adrien heard the words but understood what they meant. They weren't managing. They were surviving. Elena wrapped the food carefully and placed it into a container. She thanked him again, picked up the small bag, and walked toward the kitchen. Adrien watched her leave. Something inside him wouldn't let the moment go. He asked the restaurant manager about her. The manager shrugged. He said she was a hardworking waitress, a single mother, and one of the most reliable employees they had. Then he casually mentioned that she had recently requested fewer shifts because childcare costs had increased. Adrien stared at him. He asked how much she earned. the manager told him. Adrien's face hardened. The number was less than what he had spent that afternoon on a private car service. He looked toward the kitchen doors. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed of something that had nothing to do with business. The next morning, Adrien returned to the restaurant. Elena was shocked to see him. He wasn't there to complain. He wasn't there for breakfast. He had come with an unusual question. He asked whether she would be willing to speak with him. Elena immediately became nervous. She thought perhaps she had violated some restaurant policy by taking the leftovers. She expected to be fired. Instead, Adrien told her he wanted to offer her a job. Not as a waitress, as an administrative assistant at Cole Dynamics. The salary was nearly 4 times what she currently earned. Elena stared at him in disbelief. She refused at first, not because she didn't need the money, because she didn't understand why he was doing it. Adrien told her he wasn't giving her charity. He had watched how she worked. He had asked the restaurant manager about her performance. He knew she was organized, dependable, and capable. He said he believed she deserved an opportunity. Elena didn't know what to say. She had spent so long asking life for permission to survive that the idea of being given a genuine opportunity felt almost frightening. She accepted, but her new job wasn't easy. Cole Dynamics was a completely different world. People spoke quickly. Meetings moved quickly. Emails arrived by the hundreds. Elena made mistakes. Some executives underestimated her because she had come from a restaurant. One assistant quietly suggested that she was only there because the CEO felt sorry for her. Those words hurt, but Elena didn't quit. She arrived early. She stayed late. She studied. She learned. At night, after putting Noah to bed, she watched online tutorials about spreadsheets and business communication. Sometimes she fell asleep at the kitchen table. Sometimes she cried because she was afraid she wasn't good enough. But every morning, she stood up again. Slowly, something changed. Elena became good at her job. Very good. She noticed details other people missed. She remembered deadlines. She caught errors in reports. She understood how customers reacted to certain company decisions because she had spent years dealing with people face to face. Adrien noticed. He began trusting her with increasingly important tasks. One afternoon, during a major presentation, an executive accidentally sent the wrong financial report to Adrien. Elena noticed the mistake before the meeting. She corrected it quietly. The presentation succeeded. Afterward, Adrien thanked her. Elena simply smiled. She told him she had learned long ago that small details mattered when you didn't have room for big mistakes. Adrien understood that sentence more deeply than she knew. Months passed. Elena's life improved. She moved into a slightly better apartment. Noah received new school supplies. There was food in the refrigerator. The electricity stayed on. Elena still budgeted carefully, but now she could breathe. Yet Adrien's life was changing too. He had begun spending less time in his office. He started eating lunch with employees instead of alone. He began asking people how they were doing before asking about deadlines. His company introduced an employee assistance program. He quietly created a meal support fund for employees experiencing financial hardship. He never told anyone why. Except Elena. One evening, nearly a year after their first meeting, Adrien asked Elena to join him at the same restaurant. The same table. The same soft lights. The same rain outside. He placed a small envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph. It showed a little boy holding a drawing of an airplane. Noah. Elena looked at Adrien, confused. Adrien explained that he had once believed success meant never needing anyone. Then he told her about his mother. He admitted that when Elena had asked for the leftovers, he had remembered being a child and watching his mother pretend she wasn't hungry. He said her question had forced him to remember the person he had been before money taught him to stop noticing other people's pain. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She told him that night had changed her life. Adrien shook his head. He said she had changed his. For a moment, neither spoke. The restaurant was almost empty again. But this time, there was no shame. No desperation. Only gratitude. A year later, Cole Dynamics launched a foundation dedicated to helping working parents facing temporary financial hardship. The first program provided emergency groceries, childcare assistance, and job training. Adrien asked Elena to help design it. She knew exactly what struggling parents needed because she had been one. The program became one of the company's most successful community initiatives. Thousands of families eventually benefited. And whenever someone asked Adrien why he had created it, he always gave the same answer. He said that sometimes a person doesn't need someone to rescue them. Sometimes they simply need someone to notice that they are carrying more than they can carry alone. As for Elena, she never forgot the night she asked for leftovers. She sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had stayed silent. If she had let her pride win. If she had walked away. Maybe nothing would have changed. But she had learned something important. Asking for help was not weakness. And offering help was not charity when it restored someone's dignity. Years later, Noah became the first person in his family to attend university. He studied engineering. On the day he received his acceptance letter, Elena cried so hard that she couldn't speak. Noah hugged her and reminded her of something she had once told him. She had said that difficult seasons did not last forever. People did. Love did. Hope did. And sometimes, one small act of kindness could become the beginning of an entirely different life. The restaurant where it all began eventually changed owners. The table where Elena had asked for the leftovers was removed during a renovation. But Adrien kept a photograph of that table in his office. Not because it reminded him of charity. Because it reminded him of humility. He kept a handwritten note beside it. The note contained only one sentence. Never become so successful that you stop noticing someone who is hungry. And perhaps that was the real lesson of Elena's story. The most powerful people aren't always the ones who can write the biggest checks. Sometimes they're the people who stop, who listen, who notice, who give someone dignity when that person is afraid to ask. Because Elena didn't need a billionaire to save her. She needed one person to look at her and see more than a waitress. And Adrien didn't need another business victory. He needed to remember that behind every uniform, every tired face, and every quiet request, there may be an entire story that no one has bothered to ask about. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch and scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people, and perhaps somewhere, someone watching this video will remember that they still have the power to make another person's difficult day a little easier. And before we end, I have a special request for you. Comment, "Kindness still matters," if you believe one small act of compassion can change someone's life. Because somewhere tonight, there may be a mother counting coins before buying dinner. There may be a father pretending he isn't hungry so his children can eat. There may be someone sitting alone, convinced that nobody sees their struggle. And maybe they don't need a miracle. Maybe they simply need someone to notice. So if you ever find yourself in a position to help, remember Elena. Remember the leftovers. Remember the little boy waiting at home. And remember that sometimes, the smallest question can open the door to the biggest second chance. Because kindness doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, across an almost empty restaurant table, in the form of a meal someone was about to throw away. And sometimes, that meal doesn't just feed a child. Sometimes, it feeds hope. And hope, once given a chance, can change everything.